Last time, we followed Gaius Marius through his sixth consulship in 100 BCE. This time, the old soldier will make his glorious return to the battlefield in the social war. The causes of the social war are still under debate in the scholarship. One of our ancient sources, Appian, claims that the war began over the Italian allies' desire for Roman citizenship. However, this view has been called into question by many scholars, some of whom now think that land reform was the ultimate cause, rather than citizenship. It's difficult to say for sure because the two issues are closely related. Not every Roman citizen could be a landholder. In the Roman Republic, there were different tiers of citizens. At the top were full Roman citizens who held optimo iure, which translates to something like the best right. These were a suite of rights which included ius connubium, the right to get married, and ius commercium, or the right to conduct business. Included in the ius commercium was also the right to own property. Most of the Italian allies held this status, but not all of them. Many of the allies, or socii, were classed as peregrini, or foreigners, devoid of any form of Roman citizenship. In fact, there were many peregrini living both in the north and south of the Italian peninsula throughout the 90s BCE. Some of them held their inferior status because their ancestors had sided with Hannibal during the Second Punic War. When the Romans won that war, they either rewarded or punished future generations of Italians with limited Roman citizenship, including the right to own property, or not. The Romans of those previous centuries had conquered most of the Italian peninsula in this way, offering each defeated Italian tribe a treaty, which obligated them to serve in the Roman army in exchange for some form of citizenship. In almost every case, the lands of a freshly conquered people were designated as ager publicus, or public land by the Senate. For many allies, as long as they provided manpower for the army when asked, the conquered elites were left to do with the ager publicus what they pleased. In reality, this freedom to use the ager publicus was virtually unrestricted, perhaps only coming with a nominal yearly fee payable to the Senate. After generations of this kind of treatment, the Italian allies began to view their local slice of ager publicus as their own. They built infrastructure, giant plantations known as latifundia. Many of these larger estates were owned by powerful and moneyed interests who did not legally control their own property. Into this tinderbox, in the 90s BCE, the Senate began to make plans for the resettlement of Marius's veterans on ager publicus, and the local Italian allies were not happy. The lands recaptured in the north of Italy after the Cimbric War were a particularly thorny issue. Prior to the invasions of the Cimbri, these lands belonged to allied Italians who didn't have Roman citizenship. Those allies who had been dispossessed by the Cimbri were expecting to resettle their previous homes. But now, Marius and company had different plans. They sought to settle the veterans of the Cimbric War on these very same lands, dispossessing even very wealthy members of the local population. The result was a mass revolt of the allies, and the brief development of a kind of counter-Roman republic, complete with its own capital, Corfinium, and its own 500-member Senate, controlled by the allies and aligned against the original Senate of Rome. Presumably, this counter-Senate would quickly resolve all of the problems of land redistribution. But it was not meant to be. The Romans responded with force in what amounted to a kind of civil war. The Roman strategy to put down the rebellion was to divide Italy into two distinct theaters, north and south. The northern theater was allotted to Publius Rutilius Lupus, while the southern theater went to Lucius Julius Caesar. That name might sound familiar. Lucius Julius Caesar was the second cousin of the more famous Gaius Julius Caesar and the grandfather of Mark Antony. Don't worry, Since both of these men were certainly responsible for the death of the Roman Republic, they will each get their own series in time. At any rate, given the fresh military emergency roiling the state, Marius was tapped to serve as Lupus's legate, while Sulla, remember Sulla? He served as Caesar's. Within a year, Lupus was killed in action, and the Senate granted Marius joint control over the northern army alongside the praetor Quintus Servilius Caepio. That name might sound familiar. This Quintus Servilius Caepio was the son of the consul of the same name that was routed when fighting the Cimbri at Arausio. The Romans really do have the most creative names. Initially, Marius had great success in the social war, and after Caepio was killed in action, he became the sole leader of the northern army. But then something happened. After his first and only victory, Marius apparently became quite indolent, neither attacking nor moving his forces anywhere. Plutarch supposes this was because of his age and failing health. Whatever the state of his body, his fighting spirit seemed to be totally unaffected. Plutarch writes, Legatai de poplio Silonos, hos megiston echeton polemion. It is said that Publius Silo, who had the greatest authority and power among the enemy, once said to him, If you were a great general, Marius, come down and fight it out with us. To which Marius answered, Well, if you were a great general, force me to fight it out with you against my will. And at another time, when the enemy had given him an opportunity to attack them, but the Romans had played the coward, and both sides had withdrawn, he called an assembly of his soldiers, and he said to them, I do not know whether to call the enemy or you the greater cowards, for they were not able to see your backs, nor you their necks. At last, however, he gave up his command, on the ground that his infirmities made him quite incapable of exercising it. Marius seemed to gain little from his experience in the social war, other than a taste for further military adventure. After a lackluster performance against the Marsi, one of the Italian allies, Marius returned to Rome with a fresh desire for command. He wouldn't need to wait long for an opportunity. In 88 BCE, Mithridates VI, king of Pontus, invaded the Roman province of Asia on the west coast of what is now Turkey. There, he massacred every Latin speaker he could find, encouraged debtors to kill their Roman creditors, and slaves to kill their masters. The Asiatic Vespers, as they are now known, were a rare instance of the Romans suffering a genocide. When news of these events reached the capital, everyone understood the inevitability of a massive Roman military response. The consuls for the year 88 were Lucius Cornelius Sulla, yes, that Sulla, and Quintus Pompeius Rufus. Command of the Mithridatic campaign was given to Sulla over Rufus by lot. However, Marius really wanted it for himself. Plutarch tells us that Marius made his desire known by marching down to the Campus Martius, the traditional location where Romans mustered their armies, and performed military exercises there with the troops. He also notes that Marius was looking too old and fat to be doing any of this. As soon as Sulla left the city, Marius used his favorite trick once again, that of the plebiscite, to try and take command of Sulla's army. After all, it worked on Metellus, didn't it? The Concilium Plebis passed a law that included an amendment naming Marius, now a private citizen lacking any public office whatsoever, command over the Mithridatic campaign. Why Marius thought this would work remains a bit of a mystery. Perhaps his addiction to command and power made him overlook the potential downsides of usurping command from Sulla. Regardless, when Marius sent his legates to the military camp in Capua to take command away from Sulla, it went about as well as you might expect. Sulla's soldiers stoned them to death. What happened next was unprecedented in Roman history. Sulla ordered his army to march on the capital itself. The men obeyed these illegal orders presumably because they feared that they might miss out on the opportunity for plunder in the Mithridatic campaign if they did not, since Sulla had made it clear to them that if Marius was granted campaign of his legions, he had every intention of raising his own separate force and using it against Mithridates anyway. While the rank-and-file soldiers might have approved of Sulla's orders, the officers in Sulla's army did not. All but one quaestor abandoned the army in disgust. One quaestor was more than sufficient. There were numerous opportunities to rethink this strategy and turn the army around, but Sulla was determined to finish his march on Rome. The Senate sent one, then another, then a third ambassador, each asking why he was marching his army towards the city. And each time, Sulla's answer was the same: to deliver her from tyrants. Marius received the reports of the approaching army with dread. He tried by various means to raise a defense force, offering gladiators and slaves their freedom if they would fight for him. Surely, a motley crew of gladiators and slaves would keep Marius safe from the might and power of the professional Roman army, right? Join me next time as Marius runs for his life from Sulla's forces. I'm Matt Lupu. Thanks for listening.